Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the XR Summit. My name's Damon Cureton, Senior Journalist for XR Today. And we have on an excellent panel lined up for you guys for the Unlock Your Potential with XR session. So today we have on Elizabeth Hyman, President and Chief Operating Officer for XR Association, which is doing some amazing things in Washington, D.C. to advocate and to, press for a lot of the different XR solutions. And also we have Lee Kebler, Director of Journey, and he is also doing some amazing things with many people like Kathy Ackle, and his company Journey is doing some really good stuff with building experiences for a lot of different clients. So we're going to talk a bit about that more in depth for this particular session. So welcome aboard, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Damon.
This will be fun.
Cool. So we're going to start it off. We're going to go to you, Elizabeth. We're going to talk a little bit about XR and what exactly your organization is doing with it. So you just recently published a research document from the Martech Group, and it was a survey on the global XR workforce market. So what exactly could you tell us about that, and what were some of the most important takeaways from that survey?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks again. Good to be here. And we did a survey of about 250 learning and development slash HR professionals across about 5 different sectors. And really, what you can take away from it is a recurring theme that I'm sure Lee is very familiar with, which is that, coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing so much in terms of accelerating the digital transformation, and that XR is becoming more and more a part of that story. And so when we talk to these learning and development professionals, they're trying to figure out what are the tools available to skill their workforce in the most efficient, practical, and lasting way. And so they're very intrigued with XR for its potential in that regard. And I think we're seeing a bigger set of numbers around that, but they still don't know exactly how to implement it. They know it's good, but they're looking for like tools and skills and thoughts around how to implement this type of technology. And so we're hoping, through the work that we do and also some of the conferences that we hold, that we'll be able to help fill out that story. And I would encourage people to check out our website, xra.org. There's a pretty quick infographic that sums up all of the actual numbers that I won't go into today, but suffice it to say, when you look at transportation or construction, they're pretty much at the forefront, I think, in terms of thinking about use of this. But we also see some cool stuff in healthcare and education, manufacturing. So lots of great stories to tell.
Excellent. Great for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that with us. And we're going to jump over to Lee, get his opinions and insights on Journey and what they're doing today. So for you, you're building a lot of these immersive virtual worlds for clients. And I wanted to know, what are some of the most essential factors when you decide to build these? What kinds of things do a lot of your clients look for when they develop these immersive experiences?
Well, a lot of times the client, they might not actually know what they're looking for. They're looking for success, whatever that looks like, and they're not really even sure what that metric is. And ironically enough, it's similar to real estate. How are you successful in real estate? It's location, 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 and we have that conversation with a client when they come in and say, okay, well, what's your target? Like, who's your target demographic? Who are you trying to reach? Who are you trying to communicate with? What's the message you're trying to send? Or are you just trying to give a place where, an event happens? And then we look at that information and say, okay, well, that may fit in this platform over here. It might fit in this platform over here, because we want to have this concept that the metaverse exists, and I'm the wet blanket that's like, the metaverse doesn't exist yet. Like, we don't have a true definition. We're in the process of building it. The metaverse happens when all of these platforms are immediately interchangeable, and we're not there yet. And so we still have to take this larger viewpoint look when talking with a client and say, okay, where are we trying to have this product live? younger age demographic wants to do more games and maybe some like music events or something like that, we're probably going to push towards Roblox. If it's like mid-teens, we could look at things like Fortnite. Maybe you're trying to get into more of the digital real estate space and you're starting to look at things like Sandbox or something like that. Or maybe you're looking for a true XR virtual reality experience, and we're going to talk about like VR chat. Or maybe you've got to build your own, right? Sometimes we come across a enterprise company that is doing something that their target demographic is their customer, and they need to build something on their own. I spent a number of years just building VR for the steel industry, for previs and manufacturing, and it has nothing to do with any of these fun, places. It's just like, we take an approach to what the client's looking for. In that particular case, there was an increase in steel tariffs, and I think it was like 2017, and they couldn't waste steel anymore. So we had to go into what's a previs solution using virtual reality that we can start coming up with design around this new cost occurrence. And that's kind of where we have to hit the ground running, is where are we trying to go? Because there's no singular answer. So that's how we start.
Yeah, good use cases that you mentioned there. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of clients that are going to turn to XR, they're going to see that there's going to be many, many more use cases in the future. So it's going to take a bit of creativity to understand what the clients want, as well as how they can, how like Journey and other kinds of companies can actually deliver those solutions to them using XR. So yeah, I wanted to take it back to Elizabeth. I wanted to talk a little bit about engaging, you know, different lawmakers, different sections of society to kind of push for these different kinds of, these different kinds of technologies, making them, a mainstay within society. So some great news happened recently. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a 3-year journey, no pun intended. About 3 years ago, something called the Endless Frontier Act was introduced, and it was legislation to try to support research and development around emerging technologies. And we saw right away, we're like, hey, immersive technologies aren't included in this club, if you will, of things like AI and quantum computing and robotics. And so we started working as this bill sort of morphed over time and ultimately became something called the CHIPS Plus Act, which was passed last week and signed into law by President Biden. We were able to get immersive technologies included in the suite of technologies that are now eligible for hundreds of billions of dollars potentially of research and development funding that would go through the National Science Foundation. So there's a very, hopefully a tangible opportunity there, and we'll have to see how actual dollars are appropriated. But I think the bigger picture, Damon, is that now XR is part of the conversation around our future, right? Where are we going globally with technology? And it's all about XR and how it interrelates with many of these other things like AI and quantum computing and machine learning and all of those good things. So we were thrilled to see that happen. And I think it is a watershed moment for our industry as we go forward.
Excellent. And
Yeah,
just quickly to segue to that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the members of Reality Caucus. I think
yeah.
that was one of the biggest instruments in achieving this, or at least on the XRA side. And could you tell us a little bit how you actually organized that?
Yeah, well, we didn't organize it. I want to be clear about that. The members of Congress organized themselves. So a caucus is almost like a special interest group on in Congress, right? Where members have a shared interest in a particular topic. And so members of Congress got together to create this thing called the Reality Caucus, and it's bipartisan. And we've worked with them over the years to help them learn more about our industry and to help them also educate their fellow colleagues about the importance of XR. And we've done webinars around healthcare and COVID. We've done different types of work. But it was really fundamentally, we talked to them about this legislation, and the members of the Reality Caucus are the ones that got an amendment into the House version of the bill that ultimately was passed into law. So, you know, it's so important. We did a little bit of a call to action. I had the opportunity, and you and I talked about this before, to speak at AWE. And one of the things that we focused on was a call to action to ask people to ask their members of Congress to join the Reality Caucus. We need more representation in Congress. And I put up a picture of where, you know, WXR Fund had sort of identified where in the United States many of the XR companies and jobs are. And they're all over the country. And yet we only have a handful of members of Congress who are part of the Reality Caucus. So we really want to encourage people to continue to ask their member of Congress to join so we can have that representation. There are advocates, and we want to make sure they know, you know, as much as possible about our industry and what's at stake.
Good points, and thanks for sharing that as well. So now we're going to jump right back to Lee, talk a little bit about Journey, and we have this very interesting concept of humanizing the metaverse experience. This has been talked about quite a bit in the Gatherverse, as well as the Immerse Global Summits and many other different kinds of organizations. So give us a quick snapshot. What does it mean to humanize the metaverse experience?
Oh, wow. There's no quick snapshot for that. What's interesting about this new form of technology, and a lot of it did, as Elizabeth rightly called out, started with people discovering a digital life during COVID, when we were all locked in a house, and how do you keep your sanity? I think we all at some level went through that. And you start realizing that your personality can be attached to kind of a digital footprint in and of itself. It shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, I'm definitely from the AOL era of technology as a kid, and you always fought for the best, coolest screen name. And if you could get a screen name that didn't have a weird string of numbers at the end of your screen name, that meant something. And, so it kind of starts with that mentality of what does it mean to be you online? What does that mean to be with other people? And we're seeing a lot, and I actually give a lot of credit to platforms like Rec Room and VR Chat for helping people kind of discover a more raw personality of themselves, right? I grew up in a scenario where you had at most a screen name and a profile pic, and that was it. And maybe a short little blurb bio on your MySpace page, and the music that you put really represented you. And if you could make glitter letters, then you were a hacker, right? And now we're at a point where it's like you have avatars, and those avatars are highly customizable. They really do reflect a personality trait, whether it's something that you like in pop culture or a different way that you want to present yourself in create a more pure form of an identity. There's a lot of talk right now, and I'm not going to get into the debate of like if NFTs are a good idea or not. I've got my own thought cases on that, but there is a lot of identity that is wrapped up just in that technology alone. And as we start looking at what digital ownership of a identity means, it gets a little muddy. And we're gonna see it get legally muddy as well. I think Elizabeth's probably a little bit more well versed to speak into that side of it, and I'd love to hear her thoughts on it. But as we create these identities by digital assets, digital locations, what are if you're a heavy user of a virtual reality social media platform, you no longer have a page, you have a space, right? It's a three-dimensional space. You have a room. That room identifies you. It's as important to you as your bedroom growing up as a kid, right? That's where your posters hang. It says a lot about you. And as you start interacting with other people in those spaces, you start interacting with a pure form of their identity, right? They have the ability to take away what would be easily recognizable preconceived notions in the real world, right? Whether that be a handicap, sexuality, race, all of those things are no longer front and center. What is front and center is that personality. Oh, you really like, fill in the blank band. I really like fill in the blank band, or I think they suck, right? And that would probably be a conversation in certain areas where you would just maybe not talk to that person for one reason or another, whether that's a positive reason or negative reason. I mean, I've met people that I've absolutely become amazing friends with in the virtual landscape. I've met people that I can't stand because their personality comes out, and you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't need to know this person, and it's real easy to hit delete, and they're no longer there. But that asset creation, that digital footprint is starting to come in through more and more. This leads to a much deeper question of who owns that, right? Especially as you start looking at music artists, you start looking at entertainers, we do a lot when it comes to like entertainment in the virtual space, whether that's a concert in something like Roblox or something more immersive like Wave XR. We're bringing in not only intellectual property, but intellectuals, right? And now that, like, how do you take that intellectual, that person, and not treat them as property, but still treat them as a protected IP? I dare say we're not close to answering that question. We just, I think, yesterday got to a conclusion that you can't copyright protect AI-based art. We're barely scratching the surface of what this means to have ownership of your personality in the virtual world. And with that, I am going to leave that can of worms wide open.
Yeah, there's so many rabbit holes to go down with that kind of information depot. Yeah, I was going to say, like, so when we look at these kinds of data that people would actually need to use, how would you say, like, in the future, you would see it creating an engaging ecosystem? Like, how would Journey approach it, or what do you think about it?
Well, you want to walk a fine line, because there's this definite want to, like, how do you do targeted advertising in the metaverse? We're not going to stop that from happening. What we can stop from happening is ads, like this Ready Player One concept of, like, hey, we can take up so much of this person's, like, field of view with ad space before they have a seizure. So we have to be a little bit more clever with that. For me, a big part of that is treating the virtual landscape like the real landscape. If you're in a digital virtual landscape, and I drink these Polar seltzer water cans, and say this is in the virtual landscape, well, it can know that I drink this, and therefore it replaces the label with something that I drink. Now, Elizabeth might be in the exact same location as I am, and maybe her drink is something completely different, and it will show up completely. Now, there's still a can in the location, right? This model still exists, but the target changes without being intrusive. I think that's where some of this data eventually goes and plays. There's a lot of talk with, like, billboards and signage and targeting ads and things like that. We're not there yet. There's still an entire conversation of, like, how do we get these assets to transfer fast enough? But we're starting to run fiber internet into people's homes at $65 a month, at least here in Oregon. So we're getting there. It takes time. It takes infrastructure. I think this is a big. I mean, Elizabeth, thank you for your work with the CHIPS Act. I'm former Intel. I get it. It's so necessary in this day and age that we have a U.S. Investment on this, because that is how that infrastructure gets built. And once that infrastructure is built and understood, then we start looking at the data that the user's creating and saying, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we do it right? Because I don't think we got it right the first time with the internet. We've learned a lot of lessons. We're still learning a lot of lessons. That's the best I've got for you, because it's one of those scenarios where the good news is no one can tell you what to do, but the bad news is no one can tell you what to do. So we're just kind of playing jazz here, and trying not to break things.
Right. We go from the World Wide World to the Wild Wild West, basically, the way it's going to work out. But yeah.
Well, can I?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry,
Go
can
for it.
I build a little bit on Lee's comments? And I think he's absolutely right. We have an opportunity here to do this the right way. And one of the things that we do as an organization is try to bring together in a multi-stakeholder fashion different voices to address some of the things that Lee was just talking about. Like, what is the future that we envision? I mentioned that part of our work is to educate lawmakers about the technology. How does it work? What kind of data does it require in order to function? What are we seeing in terms of use cases? But the simultaneous conversation is, and then what do we do with the data? What is going on in terms of best practices for the industry? We have a responsibility to take the right steps forward. And I think you were going to ask me actually, David, about some of the work that we do in best practices. And so we have created what we call our developers guides, and it started off, chapter one was all about ergonomics and safety. Like if you're building immersive experiences, how do you make sure it's comfortable and safe for the user? What can we do to put our best foot forward in that regard? And we went on to talk about immersive spaces and sort of the norms and behaviors that we have in those immersive spaces. And again, as developers, what can you do to encourage good interaction amongst your users, regardless of whether it's a social platform or even in a multi-user enterprise environment? What does that look like? And then we talked about accessibility, because we have a huge resource in our populations who have various disabilities. How do we use this technology, frankly, to get them into the workforce in a way that they've never been able to do before? And I think there's great potential with XR for that. So again, what are some of the steps that we can take when we're building these software applications to make sure, that we're not experiencing sort of the smartphone fix it afterwards moment, right? We want to try to make this accessible from the start. And in the future, you're going to see more of these types of best practice guides from us. For example, we're working on one on education for young people and XR. What are tips that parents and teachers really need to know about? So my point is this: we have an opportunity right now, before this technology goes, truly ubiquitous, to have these conversations, to bring in different voices, and to try to surface some of the opportunities, but the challenges, and what do we do about that? So I view that as part of our role, and I think certainly, in our interaction with policymakers and thought leaders, they're looking to address some of these things as well.
Excellent, excellent observations. And I really, really wanted to thank the both of you for coming out and sharing these with us. It takes a lot of foresight and a lot of experience with the industry to kind of get these ideas laid out so that everyone can see and understand them. So once again, many thanks to the both of you. We've just been speaking to Elizabeth Hyman. She is the President and Chief Operating Officer of XR Association, and we had on Lee Kebler, the Director of Journey. And I'd like to thank both of them once again. My name is Cureton, Senior Journalist for XR Today. Thanks for coming out to the XR Summit, and enjoy the show. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye now.